Hello and good evening. Tonight's gentle journey takes us to how did Vikings sleep in longhouses without freezing to death? Lower the volume, rest your eyes, and let the past be your lullaby. If this brings you peace, consider liking and subscribing only if it truly helps. And share in the comments where you're joining us from and the hour there. Now, lights down, a soft fan if you have one, and let's begin our walk through history. Step with me into a winter night so sharp your breath crystals before the sigh is finished. Snow crusts underfoot. Wind presses at timber and turf like a patient animal, testing every seam. Inside, firelight climbs the smoke and throws wavering shadows across rafters, the color of scorched honey. You feel along the benches and lie down on rough planks, wrapped in skins that smell of lanolin and earth. The first thought is simple. How did anyone sleep through this cold? The second is harsher. You, as you are, probably wouldn't, but this hall isn't built for comfort as you know it. It's built for survival measured in degrees, heartbeats, and breath. What you notice first is the smell, the signature of a longhouse winter wood smoke trapped beneath the roof, damp soil breathed out by the turf, and the musky edge of livestock penned at the far end. It clings to hair and wool and follows you into dreams. Archaeologists can still read that air in wood carbon, blackening baked into beams, a thin, hard varnish of soot that proves fires burned almost without pause. You can hear a log drop onto embers, sap hissing, sparks snapping, the modest thunder that keeps silence at arm's length. Hold one firm fact before we settle. The longhouse was the central machine of survival in the Norse world. Halls often reached the length of a modest ship, a hearth running down the middle like a glowing spine. From Norway's fjord farms and Denmark's flat fields to Sweden's lake country and westward to the wind-scoured soils of Iceland and Greenland, the forms varied, but the logic did not gather kin and animals beneath one roof. Trap what warmth you can, and let the fire and bodies do the rest. The building itself is your shield, but it's a porous one. Thick posts hunch inward, wall planks are daubed with clay and pressed with sod, and the low roof stoops to meet the wind. On a good night, the draft crawls, thin as a cat, under the door and through the seams. On a bad night, it arrives like a palm of ice across the face. People argued about these houses then, and the scholars still do. Some call them efficiently insulated by turf and sheer mass. Others insist the real heat came from wool, furs, and bodies, while the walls merely blunted the gale. Both views can be true on different nights under the same roof. Smell becomes a map. Above, the smoke thickens. Below, it thins just enough to breathe. Upper timbers lacquer to a hard black, which, odd as it sounds, helps them endure. Smoke killing pests that would have chewed or bored the wood. The same irritant that makes eyes water preserves the skeleton of the house. In a place like this, discomfort is not a flaw, it's part of the tool set. Now listen, the longhouse is never quiet. At the animal end, you catch the low rumble of a cow's breath, the shuffle of hooves in straw, a goat raking horn against a post. At the human end, a child's cough, a muttered oath when a spark lands too near a cloak, the soft, rhythmic shifting of bodies hunting for the best angle of warmth and air. The walls boom with wind and then relax, as if breathing. Between gusts, you hear the snow itself sliding in the slow sheets across the roof. Walk the walls with your eyes and you'll see why the place works at all. layers of log, clay, sod pressed into a single skin that trades elegance for survival. Roofs slope low, welcoming snow to lie there as a borrowed blanket. Inward-leaning walls behave like a ship's hull turned inside out, bracing weight and shedding weather. In some houses, the floor sinks a little into the ground, so the world itself becomes a windbreak. It's not romance, it's physics. Cold hates thickness and thrives on gaps. Here, gaps are hunted and filled. Step outside in your mind and you'll feel the trick. In the open, the night cuts like iron. Inside, even if it is not warm as you know, warm, it is survivable. That difference is the hinge between life and death. Across Scandinavia, excavations sketch the same answer in turf stains and post holes, a craft learned by repetition and remembered in bodies. Icelandic turf farmsteads carried this logic into the 19th century, not from nostalgia, but because it worked. Century after stubborn century. Is it comfortable? No, it is stubborn. The interior is dim, lit by the hearth and, if luck sits kindly, a wick lamp pooling a small oval of light. Soot drifts when the smoke eddies. The walls bulge where mud and grass were pressed in by hand. Touch them, and your fingers come away smelling of wet earth and tar. The house breathes with you. It dampens your sleeves and then dries them again. This is not a monument. It's a glove worked supple by the cold it fights. People accepted that compromise as ordinary. A draft across the ankles wasn't failure. It was Tuesday. A smoky cough at midnight wasn't calamity. It was the fee for living this far north. Some nights, the smoke lifts. Cleanly, wind sits right. The roof boards are wedged just so. Air draws up and out. Other nights, it presses down as if the sky were exhaling through the rafters. You learn to sleep lower, to angle your face toward the clearest air, to accept that breathing is a part navigation. The fire holds court at the center, indisputable and moody. Stand too near and you sweat. Turn your back and the cold pricks you to attention. Heat arrives in asymmetries, a topography you can feel with your hands, ridges of warmth and hollows of chill. Without that blaze, nothing else matters. Blankets fail, bodies fail, even the walls become decorations for a room no one can use. Archaeologists read it in long, bruised trails of burnt earth, running the length of these halls, not a fireplace, but a landscape of fire. If you want a proper measure of scale, count not chairs, but sleepers. Length is measured in kin, servants, guests, and animals' heat engines with names. The more of them breathe, the more of the room becomes tolerable. There is an arithmetic to survival. Add a cow, gain a degree. Add an uncle, gain another. Add a stranger, complain about his snoring, and then admit you are warmer with him there. This is a house that asks you to be part of the calculation it solves. Outside, green curtains of aurora may be painting the snow, but inside the palette is ember and shadow. Smoke makes ghosts of ordinary things, a hanging cloak turned giant by flicker, a drying fish turned talisman by silhouette. In that half-light, stories are born. The border between seen and imagined is thin as a frost rim. Children lie awake and watch the rafters shift. Adults lie awake and listen to their parents breathe. Before we wander deeper, fix the world in place around us, from the Skagerrak and Kattegat to the fjord farms of Vestlandet, from birch forests edging the Swedish lakes to the stony pastures of Iceland and the driftwood coasts of Greenland. The Norse lived in versions of this same equation. Where timber was scarce, turf grew thicker, whereas storms were fiercer. Roofs leaned lower, where winters were longest. Halls stretched to gather more bodies and more breath. Landscape didn't change the objective, it only altered the tactics. Was the longhouse warm? That depends on what you mean. Compared to the night, yes. Compared to a modern room, no. What it did, relentlessly, was shave the edge off lethal. It slowed heat loss, trapped body warmth, and made every ember count. It turned catastrophe into discomfort, and death into a cough and a complaint. That alchemy is what you feel now as you draw the skins higher and notice your own breath warming the hollow they make. You'll hear debates wherever people study these halls. Some reconstructions draw smoke cleanly and muffle wind to a hush. Others leave their builders hoarse and chilled, swearing wool and proximity did most of the work. Both can be right. Houses are instruments. The weather plays them. In the end, what the Norse trusted was not perfection, but routine layers of material, layers of habit, layers of bodies. You add them until the night becomes survivable. So lie still a moment and let your senses tally the truth. Soot tickles the nose. Bench boards press lines across your shoulder blade. A gust fingers the roof and passes, and the hall answers with a soft pop in the fire lullaby and warning in the same breath. Somewhere at your feet, a stranger shifts. Behind you, a cow sighs. Near your ear, a child's breath catches and steadies. This is not luxury. It is the exact distance between endurance and collapse, counted out in wood, earth, flame, and human warmth. We will follow those layers one by one, the benches and their quiet hierarchy, the stubborn puzzle of the smoke hole, the warmth of livestock, the feasts that made whole halls glow, the combs and the fleas, the lamps and the braziers, the shipwright's logic hidden in walls, the spirits people felt in the rafters. But for this first breath inside the longhouse, hold to the axis without the hall. No one sleeps without the fire. The hall is only a barn for snow. The rest is compromise, and the compromise, somehow, is enough. You shift against the wall and discover the longhouse's quiet invention. The benches. They are not beds, as you know, beds no feather ticking. No carved headboards, just long, sturdy platforms built into the side aisles, running like low shelves beneath the rafters, planks over braces, sometimes woven branches topped with boards, often edged with a lip to keep the straw from sloughing onto the floor. In the daytime, they serve as seats, worktops, storage. At night, they become the place a family lays its weight and its worries. Of all the house's compromises, these humble ledges might be the most effective, a thin border between bone and earth. Archaeological floors remember them. Post holes march along the walls. Discolorations trace where timbers once rested, and in some halls, thin layers of compressed chaff mark what was once bedding. Straw and reed leave ghost lines in dirt centuries later, flattened, burned, renewed, flattened again. From Denmark's ring forts to farmsteads along Norwegian fjords and Icelandic valleys, the pattern repeats sleeping platforms where the side aisles meet the load-bearing frame, a rhythm of boards the house relied on as much as its central hearth. Sleeping off the ground serves both body and breath. The floor is a cellar of cold, damp wicks up from soil, and drafts ride it like water in a ditch. Above your head, the rafters hold the densest smoke. Between those two realms, mud and soot the benches carve out a middle band that is bearable. Here, warmth eddies from the hearth and lingers. Here, smoke thins enough to spare the lungs. Here, a sleeper avoids the earth's chill and the rafters' sting. It is a geography of survival mapped in wood. Lie back and feel the materials do their quiet work. A cushion of straw, sometimes reeds, sometimes heather in coastal places, goes down first. It crackles, itches, and smells faintly sweet when new, sour when old. On top of that, woven or felted woolen covers, pressed flat by use. Above that, the hides and furs that make a winter night tolerable. Your shoulder finds the seam between two boards. A rib of the bench prints itself into your skin, and then, slowly, warmth pools. All the way at the bottom of this little stack lies simple carpentry, a few inches of height that turns a freezing night into one you can outlast. These benches were not a single occupancy. They were rafts built for crowds. People packed together lengthwise, sometimes with children crosswise across adult legs to make a living lattice. Privacy isn't just rare, it's a foreign idea. Your uncle's elbow bumps your ribs. Your cousin's knees knock your shins. Someone's foot, searching for an edge of warmth, finds your ankle and stays, but heat grows. 10 bodies make a weather of their own. 20 make a climate. In that press of shoulders and breath, a longhouse gains a few merciful degrees. Space itself becomes a ledger of status. The places closest to the hearth are owed to age or rank elders. Honored guests, the man or woman who leads this household. Farther down the wall and nearer the door, the benches grow colder, the drafts more persistent. Servants, hirelings, and late arrivals end up there, lying with noses tucked under cloaks and eyes watering from wind. You can read a household by bedtime the way you might read a seating chart at a feast. Even with eyes closed, the order of the night announces itself in temperature. Beneath the platforms, the house finds more purpose. Tools slide under, coils of rope, sacks of grain, a chest of spare wool, a bundle of kindling the children were tasked to gather before dusk. In a poor year, you might even tuck a few root vegetables in the coolest corners, away from hungry goats and the stray dog that slips between legs at mealtime. The bench becomes furniture in the oldest sense, functional from floor to fur. You lie with a hand's breadth between your head and the family's winter store, the smell of the year's harvest rising faintly through the cracks. Some benches show traces of repairs and repurposings. Planks charred along their edges hint at nights when sparks leapt too far and bedding smoldered before hands smothered it with cloaks. There are stories in those blackened rims, someone waking to the smell of singe, someone cursing as they stomped out the ember, someone checking the baby's hair for ash while the rest of the hall coughed and laughed with relief. The longhouse is practical, but always perilous fire solves cold and then becomes its own danger. Not every platform spans an entire wall in one smooth ribbon. In some excavations, benches a step like low terraces, slight variations in height that partition sleeping zones. It is easy to imagine families claiming their stretch of plank by habit and argument. This stepwise design also solves a physical problem. Heat loves to rise, smoke loves to hover. A tiny climb or drop along the bench's length is enough to place one sleeper in clearer air than another, enough to make the draft nibble at ankles rather than bite at throats. You can feel the craft in the details. A pegged joint, still tight centuries on, tells of a carpenter who knew where weight would collect along the hip, at the shoulder, where adults levered themselves up to tend the fire at night. The lip that keeps a straw from sliding is worn smooth, where hands grab it to pull blankets higher. In places near the door, the boards are dark and polished by damp cloaks laid to steam dry, while their owners doze work and sleep braided together in the same square of wood. The benches shape childhood differently than modern rooms ever could. There are no nurseries here, no cribs hidden behind doors. Children learn to sleep by learning to share, to find safety in the warm middle between adults, to be still when elders need rest, to listen to the house and the season as much as to a parent's voice. A toddler's breath puffs against your collarbone. A teenager mutters in a dream about a sheep that refused the pen. Close enough to the hearth, an elder's steady snore becomes the metronome of the night. In such closeness, care becomes tactile, a hand on a child's back to feel breath rise and fall, a mother's shawl eased from her shoulders and spread across two small bodies, a father's palm checking for fever in the half-dark. There are leaner benches in poorer halls, broader ones in richer places, but none are truly soft. Comfort in this world is not the absence of pressure. It is the presence of heat. The planks will leave their marks, and the straw will itch, and the wool will scratch your neck, and you will be grateful, because the alternative is the earth's cold rising unbroken into your bones. In summer, the platforms double as places to repair gear, twist yarn, or lay out fish to dry in thin bands of light under the eaves. In winter, they are lifeboats moored to the walls, and everyone climbs aboard. Language remembers their purpose. In old words, a bed is not a frame, it is a seng, the bedding itself. The gathered materials that can be rolled, shaken, and remade wherever there is room. The bench is the stage on which the seng is laid. Each evening, fresh straw if you have it. If not, the best of what remains is shaken out. Ashes is sprinkled to dry damp patches and harass fleas. Cloaks spread. Hides lifted. Children placed. The ritual is mundane and holy in equal measure. Household liturgy practiced every dusk. At their most revealing, the benches turn into maps of a household's history. Here the spot where a grandmother used to keep her spindle and comb, still faintly scented with smoke-sweet wool. There, the place where a traveling trader once slept through a storm and left behind a foreign charm stitched into a scrap of cloth. In the crack between two boards near the hearth, a bead as small as a fingernail that escaped a necklace long ago. The platforms collect lost things until they become a story in layers: splinter, straw, fiber, ash, and the grit of years. You can test the Longhouse's logic with your own body. Slide down from the bench to the earthen floor, and the cold leaps at your calves. Stand and lift your face, and your eyes sting where the smoke gathers. Return to the ledge and the air steadies. The warmth returning is not luxury. It is a strategy proven by countless nights. In a world where survival lies in inches and habit, those few inches of height are an invention as cunning as any weapon or sail. And so you settle again, a shoulder's span from the next sleeper, forehead warmed by the glow, back cooled just enough to keep you tucked close under the skins. The bench hums faintly with the breath of those around you, with the small creaks of wood accepting weight, with the soft rustle of a straw that says this house is full and is still alive. Somewhere down the wall, a child giggles, shushed at once. Someone at the hearth rolls an ember with a stick. A goat thumps in its pen. The night is doing what it always does here, pressing in, and the benches answer the way they always have, by lifting a family a hand's breadth above the earth and calling that height enough. Run your palm across the bedding and you feel a plan. You can't see layers doing different jobs the way tiles on a roof do, each catching what the last lets through. The Vikings didn't climb into beds so much as build them anew each night out of what they had planned: wool, hide, stacked in an order learned by muscle memory. First, the base, a mattress of dried grass or straw, sometimes reeds from marsh edges or heather from wind-tough hills. It spreads the weight, lifts bone off plank, wicks damp away from a skin. When it is fresh, it smells like summer, the ghosts of hayfields and riverbanks, and its rustle is a comfort in itself. When it's old, it sours, collapses into dust, and invites small things you'd rather not share with. Then the bundles must be shaken, replaced, or salted with ash to dry and discourage what crawls. On top of that plant layer comes wool, the Viking world's quiet miracle. The fleece of northern sheep is not finicky. It is engineered by weather. Fibers crimp and curl, trapping air so that even damp warmth stays. Lanolin, that faint fatty scent that clings to your fingers, helps water bead and never fully soak through. Cloth here is seldom delicate. Thick twills and everyday wadmal, sturdy homespun used as currency as much as clothing, get laid down as covers and throw blankets. You feel the weave with your fingers, diagonal ridges like tiny waves, tablet-woven edges that don't fray, seams reinforced where hands tug every night. Some textiles are felted, the fibers matted into dense, springless pads that don't shift when you do. Nothing is wasted. A cloak that walked the fields by day becomes a coverlet by night. A shawl that held a baby against a mother's back becomes an extra layer over two sleeping chests. Above the wool, sometimes below it, depending on taste and season, lie the hides and furs. This is the layer that changes everything. A sheepskin lays down like a small cloud, dense with underwool. A goatskin is tougher, less forgiving, but still warm. A reindeer hide is a universe apart, hollow hairs holding heat. A winter shield that turns drafts into distant rumors. In some houses, you'll see beaver, fox, even bear. These did not grow within the fence. They rode in on trade routes that braided farms to forests and riverways far away. A fur in your bedding is not just insulation. It's a story of who your kin have bargained with, where they have voyaged, what they can afford to bring home when winter insists on its due. Think of the hands that made these layers. Summer work hums inside them. Women and girls skirting fleeces, spindles whirring, wrists flicking a twist into raw fiber, looms creaking as cloth grows in bands of shadow and light, offcuts saved in baskets, later stitched together into patchwork warmth. Even the simplest blanket carries hours upon hours of a skill, a selvage that never unravels. A corner darned so precisely you cannot find the repair in the dark. You don't need a list of names to know who made your warmth. You can feel them in every seam. There's a choreography to laying the bed that a household keeps without speaking. Someone shakes the straw into a lofted drift and pats it flat. Another spreads the wool, checks for damp spots by palm, turns a blanket so the less smoky side faces down. Hides are lifted last, fur against skin, when frost is hard, fur outward when a smoke lies heavy, and the slicker side is easier to wipe and keep clean. Children learn the sequence the way they learn the names of kin: a straw, wool, hide, then cloaks over all, like a final benediction, which goes where is not fixed a law. Some prefer hide to lie beneath, hair side down, so the wool above can breathe and wick. Others swear by fur on top to trap the pocket of heat quickened under the cloth. Experiment lives here, shaped by wetness, wind, the temperament of the fire, the number of bodies sharing the bench. In your own body, you can feel why households argue good-naturedly about it and do what their elders did, because a trick that saved a winter once becomes custom. Smell belongs to these layers as surely as warmth does, and it tells you things. Fresh straw sweetens the corner by the door. Lanolin wraps you in the breath of sheep and wet fields. Cured hide brings an earthy musk that never fully fades. Add wood smoke, the house's second skin, and the bouquet becomes the perfume of survival. Modern noses might flinch. There's reassurance in it. If your cloak smells of ash, if your blanket smells of lanolin, if your fur smells of beast and winter grass, then you're not going to freeze tonight. Status threads itself through bedding as softly as it threads through feasts. A family that can unroll a reindeer hide when the first deep cold arrives has reached friends or trade partners far north. Silver paid out for warmth, favors that will be called in come a spring. A beaver pelt whispers of riverside bargains on forested routes, where merchants carry news as much as goods. Even color speaks a band of madder red or indigo blue in a blanket's border dye that took time and trade draws the eye when the firelight catches it. Yet the hierarchy of warmth is not absolute. A poor household with clever hands and clean habits can outsleep wealth well-shaken straw, dry wool carefully sun-aired on bright winter days, cloaks mended before halls bloom into drafts. Care is its own kind of riches. Archaeology backs the texture under your fingers. In graves, tufts of wool cling to brooch pins. Weaves imprint themselves into greened bronze. Beads and combs are found where heads once lay, in floor layers under benches. Thin black horizons of charred straw speak of bedding refreshed, burned, renewed. In a few burials so rich they feel like songs, ship graves where women or chieftains slept their last among oars. Fragments of patterned cloth and fur survive to prove what the living already knew. A person's final rest demanded the same materials that guard it every winter night. The materials teach physics whether or not anyone uses the word. Straw is a spring and a sponge. Wool is a baffle. Fur is a valve. Together, they make a microclimate that turns breath into weather. Curl your knees up and the space inside the covers warms 2 handspans from your nose outward. Uncover a shoulder and the heat leaks instantly, a small storm front rolling away. With 3 sleepers under one hide, the system multiplies itself, more warmth generated, more pockets of still air, fewer edges for drafts to find. Children are not placed between adults only for comfort or care. They are placed there because the center is the warmest place in any arrangement of bodies. This is architecture by instinct. What about the itch? It is there. Of course, the straws bristle. The wool's a scratch at the throat when it brushes the skin. The hair of a hide tickling the nose if you tug it too high. People manage it by habit. Bare skin meets the softer side of cloth. Shawls fold under chins. A strip of linen precious cooler. Smoother sometimes lines a child's cheek where wool would chafe. In summer, when the longhouse breathes easier and the night air bites less sharply, cloth gapes open, fur is kicked aside, and a simple woolen throw is enough. In winter, everything tightens hands, tug the edge of a hide to seal the seam between two sleeping shoulders. A mother's palm smooths a cloak so the cold finds no tunnel. Trade pricks the edges of these layers like distant stars. A scrap of patterned silk stitched into a blanket's corner, saved from a tunic that traveled far. A thin braid in a foreign style reinforcing a frayed selvage. You can feel the way the world reaches into this one room and how this room reaches back. A merchant can boast at a feast, but the quiet proof that matters is this: his children sleep under things that did not grow within sight of the hall. Ritual creeps in where habit opens a space, a charm stitched with coarse thread into the edge of a child's cover. A whispered line, half prayer, half proverb, said as the last hide is laid, an iron knife set near a baby's feet, or a key tucked under a mother's cloak. For luck, someone says, or so frost passes us by. No one writes these acts down, the house remembers them anyway. In the morning, you find the key where you left it and smile, not because metal holds back weather, but because intention steadies the hand that tends the fire. Maintenance is as important as making. On a day of hard sun and hard frost, the wool goes outside, flung over fences and branch racks to drink clean cold and return a sweeter. Hides are brushed, smoke stunk, but supple. Straw is shaken, bad handfuls thrown to the pens, where they'll be trampled into tomorrow's floor. Ash, what last night's fuel leaves behind, becomes medicine sifted finely. It dries damp patches and nettles tiny inhabitants. Come evening, the layers stack again, a small harvest of the day turned into warmth. Lie back and notice the difference each layer makes to your breath. Without a straw, your back asks the earth for permission you do not have. Without wool, your heat slips and is gone. Without fur, drafts carve little rivers across your chest. With all three, the house's war against night is suddenly winnable. And once more, the last layer is people. A cloak spread wide across three sleepers. A hand pulling the edge straight. The weight of another body easing the quilts into a seal against the cold. In this stack, your own warmth is not yours alone. It moves outward, is received, returns to you changed, amplified. Bedding is not just fabric, it is the instrument the household plays together until the tune of dawn begins. The hide you've pulled to your chin isn't from the pasture beyond the fence. Its sleekness tells you so at once. The hairs lie differently, densely layered, whispering of forests you have never seen, and river ice that breaks later than it does here. It is a traveler. This pelt an object with a passport. Lift one corner to your cheek, and you can almost feel the miles, the quiet of a trapline in a dark spruce wood, a sled creaking over crusted snow, a marketplace where men speak half a dozen tongues and bargain with gestures as often as words. In the Viking world, warmth had a map. Bedding could be local straw, sheep's wool, goat skin, or it could be proof that your household's reach extended far beyond the ridge of your roof. Follow that fur backward in your mind, and you see the trade paths that stitched the north together. From the Sapmi lands came reindeer hides with hollow hairs that trap heat like tiny bottles. From the deep Baltic forests, beaver and marten, strong and silky, prized for the way they shook off damp. Along inland rivers that double as winter roads, sledges slid from one frozen bend to the next. In spring, the same routes ran with shallow draft boats. The pelt on your bench might have rested in a pack at Koh Pang, changed hands on the wharves at Hedeby, or been bartered in the busy lanes of Birka places where gulls cried over masts and you could buy a bed's worth of warm sleep with a handful of silver and a promise kept. Silver, too, told stories. When a fur changed homes, sometimes a stamped coin came with it. Bright discs, once minted in far warmer lands, now nicked and cut into weights that fit northern scales. Those little crescents glinted in the smoky light of longhouses from the fjords to farmsteads, proof that a pelt had not simply been skinned and tanned, but entered into a chain of trust, linking lakes and seas. Stepping from palm to palm, your blanket became an archive. Press your face into its pile and, if you knew how to read it, you could trace the route: a hunter's snare, a trader's sledge, a crossing at a portage where men hauled boats over wet grass and grunted in good humor about the mud. Trade was not just merchants and coin, it was neighbors braided together. Farmers bartered goat cheese for a strip of fox. Fishermen traded dried cod and oiled skins for a small reindeer pelt to lay over a child in deep winter. The Sapmi might come to a summer thing with sleigh bells tinkling under the sun that never sets, their packs smelling of smoke and resin, and leave with iron tools and cloth that would walk back across the tundra on shoulders and later sleep under their owners in a tent glowing with lamplight. Each exchange made winter a shade easier and stitched one family's survival to another's. Lie still and count the ways a single hide altered a night. A reindeer cover turns the draft into a rumor. A beaver pelt doesn't just insulate, it caresses, staying warm even when your breath dampens it. Households remembered those differences the way they remembered favorite recipes. This one for the baby, someone would say, choosing the reindeer. This one for the eldest, who comes home wet from the boats, laying beaver across his feet. This patched sheepskin for the corner near the door, where the wind sneaks in. Luxury in winter was not display. It was a specificity, the right material, in the right place, for the right body. Status threaded itself through these choices as softly as a border pattern stitched into wool. A family who could unroll a whole reindeer hide when the first real cold arrived spoke of connections to the far north or of a successful season's trading. A strip of soft sable or a fox pelt used as a child's wrap didn't only keep a small chest warm, it announced to visitors that the household's warmth reached all the way to the forest edges and the river loops where such furs were won. But the status slept beside thrift. A clever household multiplied what they owned: a large hide cut carefully into 2 blankets and a hood, a worn edge turned into mitts, a strip stitched under a cloak at the shoulders where the snow melts as soon as it lands. In winter economies, waste was a colder word than poverty. You can almost hear the markets where these winter tools entered domestic life. At Hedeby, sellers call out over a quaff of a smokefish oil, iron nails, blue glass beads, combs cut fine-toothed for lice, and hides stacked like dark water. A woman tests a fur the way she tests yarn: pinch and pull, rub, breathe into it, listen to the nap whisper under her palm. She pays in cloth or coin, or a mixture of both. Perhaps the seller tosses in a sliver of fat to dress the hide come spring. Men load the purchase with the same care they would a blade not because it is rare, but because it is essential. No one carries an extra winter. There's a social life to blankets once they reach the bench. Guests notice. An uncle from a poorer valley runs a thumb across the beaver and grins. A visiting trader recognizes a stitch that marks a Sami tanner's work and tells a story to prove it. Children learn to name furs by touch in the dark, a game that is also education. Someday they all trade for their household. And it matters that they can tell fox from dog, reindeer from red deer, even with eyes closed and smoke stinging. Bedding becomes a language shared, practical, and, at moments, proud. Not all softness in a hall means something costly. Wool can be raised and fulled until it feels nearly like felted fur. Sheepskin, if well cured, catches and holds warmth so thoroughly that you forgive it for shedding hairs into your mouth when you tug it too high. And when a hide grows old, bald patches widening like shallow lakes, someone will cut it into collars. Line a cradle. Patch a spot on a bench where a familiar elbow always rests. The life of a pelt, like the life of a cloak or a pot, curves through form's blanket. Lining, infant wrap, then scraps stitched into a quilted pad that steadies a shaky elder's seat. Trade gives the first a spark. Household craft keeps it burning to ash. Of course, not every imported fur stayed gentle. A wet hide can sour, and the best pelt will bite with cold if laid wrong. Hairs that are heaven on a cheek can itch a forearm mercilessly. People answered with practice. Lay fur up when the air is dry and the fire fierce. Fur down when the night breathes damp and your exhale beads on the wool above. In deep freeze, double it, wool to wick, fur to trap, cloak above to seal. The conversation between materials and weather goes on all winter long, in fingers and shoulders and little midnight adjustments you forget by dawn. Even the stories climb into bedding. A small token, a bead that once hung on a riverman's neck, a sliver of foreign silk stitched under a seam, where only a mother's hand knows it turns a blanket into a talisman. A child lulled to sleep beneath a fir is told where it came from. This crossed ice where the sun peaks for only an hour. This rode on a sled pulled by reindeer as light as wind. When you're older, you will hear the bells that hung at the animal's neck. Traders wear their lives on their skin. Farm families sew travelers' courage into their beds. And so warmth becomes a ledger without ink. Over a winter, you can feel a good year in the weight that lies over your collarbone, in the way your feet do not wake you with their sting. In a lean year, wool must do the work alone and do it well. You tuck the thinner sheepskins to the middle where bodies multiply their power, and you tell the story of better furs with a laugh that is not accusation but promise. The hall remembers, because bodies do. The first time a new fur is unrolled, someone sighs before they mean to, relief escaping like steam. That sound is history, paid for in days at sea, in sled miles, in bargaining done with dignity. Now the pelt rides back down from history into your hands. Slide it higher. Feel how the hairs take on your body's heat and give it back more gently than any beam or stone ever could. Know that a patchwork of a stranger's skill, the hunter who set a trap in the half-dark, the tanner who knew exactly when to rinse and when to stretch, the trader who kept his word at the scale, the weaver whose cloak lies beneath the fur, has become a single choir of warmth. You're not alone under this hide. You're under an agreement that took months and many voices to make. and that will keep speaking on your behalf until the frost loosens its grip and the longhouse opens its doors to the first wet light of spring. You shift under the hides and only then feel the full press of the room. This isn't a bed chamber, it's a hive. Along the walls, the benches blur into a single ledge of bodies, a tangle of elbows and knees, wool and hair, the soft snorts of the very young and the long, saw-toothed breathing of the very old. A longhouse this size has a space for everyone who belongs, and for a few who don't, at least for a night. Grandparents, parents, children, kin by marriage, hired hands, even a guest or two folded into whatever gaps remain. Warmth is a communal project, so is discomfort. The logic is simple. The more bodies, the warmer the air. In a hall that can stretch 20-30 meters from door to door, a dozen sleepers create a little climate of their own. 24 build a weather system. Heat rises from people, not just from fire, and the benches are placed where that warmth lingers longest, just above the chill that puddles on the floor, far enough below the rafters that the smoke thins to a manageable haze. You find your place in this stratified atmosphere, your cheek turned to a patch of wool that smells of lanolin and smoke, your shoulder pressed to someone whose breath arrives with a faint whistle. It isn't private, but it is survivable. No one pretends that privacy lives here. It is a luxury of later centuries and separate rooms. In this hall, your quarrels can't be whispered without acting them out in front of an audience, and your tenderness belongs to a soundscape that includes goat snores and a cousin's cough. A mother eases a child back to sleep with a palm on a small back, while an uncle farther down the bench mutters a joke aimed at no one in particular. Night here is a social fabric threadbare in spots, mended in others, always held together by the pressure of bodies. You can read hierarchy in the dark. The benches nearest the fire are for those whose names travel farthest, the head of the household, honored guests, the elder whose stories stitch the family to itself. Closer to the door, the place where drafts snake in, where the floor stays damp, you find newer arrivals, lower status, servants, bond laborers. Anyone who takes what remains after obligation has ceded the rest. It isn't cruel so much as practical theater. The same rules that arrange people at the evening meal continue when the bowls are stacked away and cloaks are spread. Order sleeps with the sleepers. The timber remembers these arrangements. In excavated halls, dark lines mark where benches ran uninterrupted along both walls, sometimes stepping up a little toward the hearth as if the carpenters wanted to give each row a different stratum of air. A beam with repeated polish on its edge tells you where hands gripped to climb. A shallower ledge at the far end suggests a child's domain, low and safe between adults' hips. Even where wood has rotted, the soil keeps secrets, a long stain where a straw was laid year after year, a scatter of fish bones beneath one favored seat, where someone always snacked too late and too often. There is choreography to the way people fit themselves together. Children slip into the seams like warm wedges. Elders take the supported places where a shoulder or a post can help them turn. Couples a slot, shin to shin, learning the dance of sleep that avoids knees and the brittle corners of iron brooches. You can tell who grew up here by how they roll without looking. A blindfolded grace learned on winter benches. A stranger bumps. A cousin does not. Position. 2 is politics. close to the central blaze and the talk. You hear decisions made and can add your voice. Near the door, you're the first to rise when the hearth needs feeding, or when somebody's bladder sends them out into the sparkling dark. To sleep by the threshold is to be part a sentry, part a servant, and many households remember who did their turns there. The story can be told kindly, he likes the cool, or sharply, that's where he belongs, and either way, the draft remains the same. All of it pulses with noise. The hall never truly falls silent. Fire crackles and hisses through damp pockets in the wood. Someone's snore rattles like a cartwheel. A baby fusses, finds a breast, goes quiet. A pig shifts behind the partition and lets out a dream groan that makes half the hall laugh under their breath. Even the stillness makes sound here, the small rustle of a straw as bodies settle, the soft tap of a ring against a wooden post. You don't sleep through it, you sleep inside it, as a fish sleeps in current. Crowding brings a grammar of courtesy. You tuck your toes before turning, warn your neighbor with a touch at the shoulder, lift your cloak instead of dragging it. A hand apologizes where words would wake too many. The hall runs on these midnights of a small diplomacy, and the penalties for clumsiness are immediate. A hissed mind yourself, a mutter, a jabbed rib. Everyone will laugh at it in the morning because everyone will have done the same a dozen times in winter. This is not a life of smooth edges. It is a life of learned allowances. There are moments of brightness tucked even here. A boy who's outgrown the cold corner for the first time gets a proud nudge toward the warmer middle. An aunt lets her niece share the softest pelt for one night because the child's cough bothers her. A visiting trader, half asleep, recites a line of a verse from a port town, and someone at the hearth picks it up, turning the line into a lullaby that loops the hall in a few breathy repetitions until voices fall away. Warmth is not only degrees on a scale, it is a practice. And when bodies crowd, stories crowd with them. This is how you inherit. A girl sleeping crosswise across 3 adults gathers family in the crooks of her arms and learns their rhythms before she learns their words. A boy wedged near the door hears every creak, knows which is wind and which is footfall, grows into the kind of man who wakes first and stands already reaching for the bar across the door. What looks to us like deprivation becomes apprenticeship. The hall teaches without a lesson. You might think the press would breed only tenderness or only irritation. It breeds both. Tempers spark in winter as quickly as pine shavings. And so do affections. 2 cousins who bickered at the evening meal bed down back to back and are already laughing by the time the cloak is settled. Their quarrel spent as quick as tinder. Another pair will nurse their sharpness for days and put thin air between them, a narrow border of wool that says more than speech. The hall bears witness to grievances and reconciliations in the slow language of who lies where. Even the mattresses broadcast a status, then undercut it. The elder with a reindeer hide is given the place where drafts are weakest. The second best pelt goes to the woman in late pregnancy. An unmarried farmhand makes do with a doubled cloak and a promise of something better after a spring shearing. And still, by dawn, none of those layers will matter as much as the shared body heat of those pressed together. The hierarchy softens in the dark because the physics of winter are democratic. Heat flows from rich to poor, whether the rich like it or not. The hall is a great equalizer. It takes from everyone their breath and gives back from everyone's breath the warmth that keeps them alive. You can feel the social map tighten and slacken as the seasons turn. In the summer, when daylight stretches like a carpet and work stretches with it, people fall asleep where they drop beside a loom, at the long table, near the door with boots still on, and wander back to benches only when someone nudges them. Winter draws them in, stitches them shoulder to shoulder. Familiarity becomes geography. Your cousin's calf is your pillow. Your uncle's knee, the hill you must cross to reach the edge of your cloak. In this softness of boundaries, you learn where you end and the family begins. Guests are a test. The hall rarely fails. A traveler is given a piece of bench, not because there is a space, there rarely is, but because the rule is older than the roof. No one freezes at a threshold. You will make room by the algebra of winter. A child tucks under a parent's arm. Two men who would prefer 2 hands' breadth between them allow one. In the morning, the guest will earn his night by work, or tale, or news. Last night's warmth buys today's kinship, even if it lasts only as far as the road out of sight. And then, near dawn, the hall rehearses itself in reverse. A first waker, someone near the ember bed. Someone near the door slides out from the heap and eases a log to the coals. A second stands, joints creaking, to lean on the door bar and listen through the crack wind. Yes, no crunch of feet. A child wriggles free and burrows back with a theatrical shiver that makes their mother chuckle low. The order that went to sleep lifts its head and yawns. No one speaks of survival. They enact it. The night did its part, and so did they. If you look at this from a distance, a plan drawn on a page, you can diagram benches and hearths and doors and think you understand the place. Up close, in the odor of wool and smoke, in the press and politeness of shared sleep, it is subtler. The Longhouse is a lived contract. Every night, each person gives up some of what they would prefer: space, silence, the right to roll without care, and receives in return what cannot be won alone: heat, safety, company that outlasts quarrel and season. That is the bargain the benches keep until the thaw. And the reason the hall, crowded and cranky and human, holds the warmth at your shins isn't only human, it carries a sweeter, heavier breath, the fog of animals penned at the far end of the hall. Beyond a low plank fence, something shifts, then exhales, and a ribbon of moist air drifts across the floorboards to find you. It smells of hay and hide and that unmistakable sourness of winter stables. To modern ears, it sounds like a compromise. To the people of this hall, it is a calculation that comes out in their favor. When the snow locks the pastures and darkness devours half the day, you do not leave your wealth or your heat outside. The building itself confesses the arrangement in ruins. Archaeologists read the byre as surely as a line of a script, a run of post holes forming stalls, the trough shadow of a feeding line, a strip of floor rubbed smooth where hooves wore their path night after night. Along one side, a shallow channel descends toward the door, a drain to carry meltwater and urine away from the sleeping benches. Layers of compacted dung and trampled straw preserve winters like tree rings. Every brown, fibrous stratum a season lived and shoveled. Here a cow stood, there sheep and goats. The Longhouse was a house in the broadest sense, sheltering the whole economy of a farm under one roof. Heat is the first arithmetic. A single cow throws off enough warmth to turn frost to weeping on nearby boards. Multiply by 3, 5, 10, and you have a steady, low-grade radiance untroubled by the fickleness of a woodpile. The bodies themselves are braziers. Every chew of cud, another watt set loose in the air. Even the bedding under hoof, the deep litter of a straw layered over dung ferments slowly, releasing a soft heat of its own. It is not a glow you can see, only a presence you can feel in the bones of the room. That corner is kinder to the skin because life is stacked in it. There are costs for every credit. The same breath that warms also carries wetness that slicks timbers and fattens mold. The same litter that gives off a little heat breeds flies when thaw comes. You taste this in the air, a sweetness that is not pleasant, a damp that clings to wool, and you hear it in the cough that wakes at the back of your own throat. The people of the hall knew this far better than we do, and still chose as they did, because the ledger evened out where it mattered most. A child's toes were not ice. A newborn kid survived to spring. In the north, you count your gains by breaths. Listen closely, and the byre gives the night a second rhythm. Skin against straw, the slow punch of a hoof repositioned. Hay being silently unwound by grinding teeth. Cows have their own sleep and their own dreams. A long, descending sigh empties a chest the size of a barrel, and the sound rolls under the benches like a tide. Children grow up inside that lullaby. They learn the language of the herd, the way they learn the grain of the wood by touch and sound, without ever being taught. The barrier between worlds is modest, a waist-high fence, a gate you can lift off its pins, sometimes no more than a rail. In some halls it holds. In others, a clever goat disagrees and wanders in search of unattended peelings. It is never quite tidy. Winter sets its own rules. A ewe lambs before dawn, and a woman steps over the rail with a cloak to catch the slick, shivering life, crooning the same words she uses for a feverish child. A pig noses the edge of the fence, thinking of embers and warmth, and is shooed back with that practiced, affectionate irritation only people who live close to animals possess. Order still arranges even this intimacy. The valued milkers are establed nearest the warmest spot. Calves, future wealth, are given sheltered corners and extra straw. A sick beast is kept at the edge where air moves more freely, where a boy can watch it through the night with a handful of herbs to crush into its feed. No one would have described this as medicine, and yet the remedy is practical drier air, eyes on the patient, a place where a cough will rouse a sleeper. Human and animal health entangle along the same bench. Season lays a second pattern across the floor. In summer, animals sleep outdoors if they can, stamping in pens that keep wolves and wanderers at bay, and the hall breathes easier for their absence. But there are always nights of rain that falls as if it has a quarrel with the earth, or winds that scrape the skin off bones. And then the gate swings open, and the byre inhales. In winter, they stay. Hay hangs in nets from rafters or stacks along the wall in sweet-smelling cliffs. A child clambers on those bales and earns a scolding because a fall would break a wrist. And every working wrist is counted through winter like silver. Security is the quiet logic beneath the obvious one. Livestock are wallets on legs. You don't display them in the open when nights are long. A bolted door makes thieves think twice, and a dog's growl in the animal end of the hall becomes a chain of waking. The cow lifts her head. The dog stands. A man near the door swings his feet down and finds his axe handle by touch. The layout is a defense plan written in timber. Warmth, yes, but also watchfulness. There is ingenuity hidden in filth. Ash from the hearth is forked onto dirty straw to bind wet and damp smell. Then fresh straw goes on top. Later, the sodden mix is heaved out in barrow loads to a midden that will sleep all summer and be a spread on fields in autumn as a sort of time-lapse bread for the soil. Even fuel loops into this cycle. In treeless places, paddies of dung are dried on a sunny wall and stacked for burning, a fuel of last resort that is still cooks a stew and dries boots. Nothing is spare, everything is used twice. Cats pad through this world like minor gods on patrol. Their business is mice, the little brown shadows that come for grain and the stay for straw, and a good mouser is honored and fed. A rat in the byre is more than nuisance. It is theft measured in mouthfuls of winter fodder. The cat's presence is another threat of belonging ship's cat by summer, hall cat by winter, weaving the farm and the sea together with whiskers and soft feet. Even the smallest predator earns its keep here. Not everyone celebrates the animal end of the hall. There are mutters about a stink and dirt. There are mornings when a child's cloak must be scrubbed with snow because small feet wandered where they shouldn't. A man curses after a hoof, finds his ankle in the dark, but then a cold snap comes down like iron, and the complaint dies. People clump a little closer to the partition without remark, drawn by invisible gradients of warmth. What felt like indignity yesterday feels like prudence tonight. Nothing persuades quite like weather. There is a moral geometry to where animal and human meet. A family that starves its beasts starves itself come spring, and everyone knows it. Children learn that care is not sentiment, but survival, a bucket at dawn, a brush at dusk, a hand along a flank to feel if flesh is melting off bones too quickly. The Longhouse ties compassion to arithmetic so tightly that separating them would be like unweaving wool. You stroke because you love and because you need, and the animal answers to both. Some winters carve stories here that outlast the people who told them. A storm that buried the fences to the top rail, a collapse of drift through the smoke vent that sent snow hissing onto coals. The calf, born in the bitterest hour, whose first breath steamed so hard it looked like a little spirit leaving and returning to its own body. People will laugh about the goat that learned to lift the latch with her lips, and sigh about the old cow that lay down and would not rise when the thaw came. Memory smells like the byre, sour and sweet together. Stand where the human end meets the animal end, and you can feel the house's logic pressing through your souls. This is not a concession to misery. It is an ecosystem built on exchange. Wood and wool, breath and heat, hay and dung, and ash and bread. The hearth at the center takes in logs and gives back soup. The byre takes in a straw and gives back warmth and milk. The benches take in sleep and give back labor. The Longhouse is a circle closed against winter, and every hoofbeat inside its walls beats time for the lives depending on it. Return to your bench and lift your cloak. When you draw breath, you're drawing everyone's breath, human and beast, together, thinned by smoke and thickened by life. It is not the air you would choose, perhaps, but it is the air that keeps you here until light lifts the ridge and the door is unbarred. Outside, the world is glass and iron. Inside, it is warm enough. In this season, enough is a victory with a heartbeat and horns. The fur across your chest is not local wool, and your skin knows it at once. It is denser, sleeker, a different kind of warmth heat that arrives quickly and lingers. You trace the nap and feel a journey hidden in each hair forest rivers, trap lines under snow, sledges across ice. This pelt has come a long way to reach a smoky bench in a Viking Longhouse. Trade is breathing in this room. Vikings did not sleep only under the sheep they sheared. They slept beneath distances reindeer hides from Sami country, beaver from eastern forests, fox and marten gathered along river routes that stitched the Baltic to the waterways of the Rus. A fur laid over bones on a winter night was also a map ports to river towns, then inland by oar and pole. Silver moved one way, pelts the other. By the time coins clinked at a harbor, someone far away had earned a warmer bed. Under such a hide, the air behaves differently. Reindeer hair is hollow, a bundle of tiny tubes that trap heat. Beaver binds glossy guards to a dense down that refuses to surrender warmth. Even a restless child will notice the change. The draft that slipped through turf and timber a moment ago dulls to a whisper. The longhouse has not turned modern, but its bite has lost a tooth. Status settles with the hide. 2. Bedding could be an announcement as plain as a banner. A family that sleeps under imported pelts is declaring rich kin who know traders at the harbor, or a father who brought home payment in kind in a world where wealth was portable. A winter's night made quiet space for proof. You can picture a geese lifting a corner of your cover and nodding, placing you wordlessly along the line between modest and fortunate. Yet reach and fortune were not the only roots. Northern neighbors made economies from their animals long before a tally of silver arrived. The Sami exchanged reindeer hides, sinew, and horn for iron and grain. Along the eastern waters, hunters trapped beaver and marten when rivers sealed, and met Norse boats at thaw. A winter bed in Scandinavia could carry the breath of partnerships as old as the tracks in the snow. Every pelt brought compromises. Fox lies light, beaver drinks lamplight until it glows. Reindeer is a miracle and also fragile if kept damp. A thrifty family might lay the fur hair side up when sleep began, then flip it to hide side when smoke thickened, sparing the nap from soot. Even so, the rafters made their mark. Nothing stayed bright for long in a room that coughed black on everything. Was this comfort common? The past refuses a neat answer. In some graves, the dead lie in plain wool. In others, they are wrapped in a soft storm of fur. Hoards point to thriving markets. Thin soils point to thrift. Many farms likely slept under what they raised, reserving precious hides for a baby, a guest, an elder, or for the weak when wind found every crack. You can hold both pictures at once, a humble bench with a single sheepskin, and a chieftain's ledge quilted in pelts that will smell of distant forests. The fur does not merely cover, it gathers. Body warmth that would slip away under plain cloth is caught and handed back. A family beneath one large skin becomes a small weather system. Breath pooling under hair, cold pushed to the edges. In a hall where the fire's generosity is fickle, this quiet technology matters as much as any carpentry. The social life of a hide runs on after eyes close. A mother chooses the imported pelt for a feverish child. A father yields his cloak when the wind turns spiteful. A visiting trader, honored for the news in his mouth as much as for the goods in his pack, is given the good fur for one night to tie a knot of friendship. In the morning, a skin is shaken by the door to shed ash, rubbed with tallow to keep it supple, and hung where the smoke discourages insects. A useful thing learns a daily ritual the way people do. In the marketplace of winter, a pelt can be as liquid as coin. 2 thick hides might settle a debt, buy a passage, or stand in for a season's labor. The skins that cross Europe's rivers cross a family's years as well. A hide gifted at a wedding becomes a cradle cover. Later, it softens an old man's cough. Later still, a narrow strip is cut and stitched as trim in a son's cloak. Trade goods turn heirlooms, and heirlooms turn again into a sleep. Bedding also speaks a language of craft. The people who turned animals into warmth knew their work scraping, stretching, smoking, softening each step the difference between a stiff shield and a blanket that falls like bread. Recipes for tanning traveled the same routes as pelts. A woman at a fjord-side farm tries a trick learned from a traveler out of the White Sea. A hunter on the Bothnian Bay borrows a knot from a Norwegian net to lace a drying frame. And still the Longhouse refuses romance. You can feel the truth in your nose. Fur is warm. Yes, but it is also alive with the worlds it came from. It smells of animals and the oils used to keep it soft. A bed like this will never be clean by our standards. It will be serviceable and dear. And in deep winter, it will be loved for exactly those reasons. Even the stories notice. When a saga pauses to set a scene, a detail slips: a wounded friend cloaked in a foreign skin, a winter guest honored with the softest bedding, a miser mocked because visitors wake with blue lips under thin wool. The moral stands without preaching. In a land where cold kills quickly, generosity and reach unfold in blankets as much as in boasts. So lie still and listen to the pelt. It murmurs of animals you will never see, of rivers you will never cross, of market tongues you will never learn. It is warmth and also direction, connection, proof that this smoky hall is not alone on the edge of the sea. The fur keeps the cold from the chest, and it keeps the world within the walls. In a culture built on motion, it is movement made into sleep. Before you drift, you pull the edge higher, and the hide falls over your ear with a soft thud. The fire is a thin line now, the roof aches under the wind, and the imported fur lands its last lesson of the night. Survival here is layered. Timber holds turf, snow seals roof, fire answers dark, wool answers drafts, and the traveling skin answers the cold that seeps past all of it, an animal's heat. Captured once, returning each time a human hand reaches out. You do not own the winter, but you have rented a little space inside it. Tonight, that rent is paid in fur. The pelts settle. The fire breathes, and then the truest blanket in the room spreads itself. People, a Viking Longhouse in winter is not a private chamber. It is a hive, a layered quilt stitched from kin, servants, foster children, and the occasional traveler who has outrun a storm. Warmth is made of bodies as much as of timber, turf, or fur. The first rule is simple and older than the house itself: those who sleep together live. Scale makes the point even before night falls. Many halls run the length of a fishing boat, and then some rooms long enough to hold generations. Their size is not for swagger. It is the architecture of survival. Several households, or branches of one, press under the same roof, grandparents closest to the fire, married sons and daughters along the walls. bondsmen and hired hands near door and draught. On feast days, neighbors spill in, and the breathing mass of the hall rises by a dozen heartbeats at once. You can feel it. When you lie down, temperature is social here. Whatever the day's pecking order, night redraws the map. Everyone slides toward heat. Children are buckled into the middle, where adult bodies make a living bulwark against frost. Infants vanish beneath cloaks, the weight of wool and the rhythm of two chests turning the cold into something distant. Elders claim corners washed in firelight, where joints do not seize and the cough sits easier. Servants and poorer kin take the edge, a sacrificial shore that feels each draft first. No one needs to announce these motions. The house remembers, and so do the people who have traced these paths since they could crawl. Benches along the walls reveal the secret history of a family. Some are wide enough to swallow 3 adults shoulder to shoulder. Some are narrow planks no wider than a man's ribs. In places, the platforms step up in tiers, subtle terraces that sort sleepers by clan or rank. The division is not always kind. A favored cousin finds her spot inching nearer to the hearth with each season. A feud can exile a man to the door's end where the night reaches in. In the morning, no one will speak of place as privilege, but sore backs and stiff fingers will remember the press of bodies has a physics. A dozen sleepers create a small climate. Under one spread of hides, breath condenses and warms. Damp settles. Edges go cold where blankets lift. The person who turns takes the weather with them. Heat, in a hall like this, is a social contract. You owe it to your neighbor to stay, to share what your blood makes, to be another brick in the wall of warmth. By the same quiet law, a guest who is given a good spot owes news in return, gossip from the fjord, a rumor of prices, a scrap of song. Heat is never just temperature here. It is currency with interest. Privacy, what we think of as its own kind of warmth, scarcely exists. Bodies are arranged less by preference than by need. You will hear your uncle's snore, your grandmother's prayer, the farmhand's midnight groan when a cramp bites his calf. Quarrels cannot hide, neither can tenderness. The household breathes one breath. To modern minds, it can look suffocating. To theirs, it was simply the shape of life, and sometimes the only way to wake all together. The hall's social script does not end with kin. Hired men who sleep near the entry wake first to feed embers, to slide the door board aside just enough to sip the dawn. Foster children sent to be raised in another household, as alliances and custom demand, find their places between those who are not blood, and yet will be family for a season or a lifetime. A widow might bed down beside her sister's line of children. A freed thrall inches nearer the fire with each year of faithful work. Night makes room for every shade of belonging and measures each by proximity to heat. None of this banishes friction. A hall is a loom that weaves and abrades at once. Tempers wear thin in midwinter when air stands stale and the cough keeps old men half awake. The day's wounds, insults, too small for daylight, but too sharp to forget, become elbows at midnight. Composure lasts until a heel drives into a cousin's hip, or a drunk guest rolls the wrong way, and then the quiet unspools into a mutter and a shove before sleep swallows it again. In sagas, such discomforts become jokes or seeds of grievance. In the Longhouse, they are just the tax one pays to live through February. Even in crowding, the house keeps a certain choreography, The place near the fire, where the light is surest, becomes the elder's court. After dusk, talk pools there. Memories are pulled down like the stored nets, and advice is poured into children the way a stew is ladled into bowls. When the last words fade, the same space shifts function, turning into the warmest strip of floor where a feverish child is carried, or a woman heavy with pregnancy is settled for the night. The hall is one room with a dozen faces, each called out by need. Guests are not outliers, but a feature of winter nights. A storm-picked traveler, a trader late to harbor, a neighbor who has overestimated the kindness of the wind. No one is turned away when frost can kill before morning. Hospitality keeps its corner. Even if the corner is narrow, he will be given a share of a stew, a skin that does not smell too strongly of sheep, and a place nearer the door than any child. He adds his heat to the sum and pays with a story. In a country of thin soil and long dark, reputation keeps boats afloat. The house that closes itself learns that the world remembers. The longhouse's warmth is not only physical. People sleep softer for the knowledge that they are many. A half-dozen men within reach of a spear give the door an answer should it lift at the wrong time. The dog at the threshold is not just another furnace, it is a bell. And when sickness moves like smoke, a cough that starts with one mouth and then learns all the names of the hall, there are more hands to sit up by the fire, to lift a child's head, to carry water warmed in a pot, black as the rafters. The group frays, then tightens. This is what it is for. In such closeness, childhood is apprenticed to endurance. A child raised crosswise between parents learns the grammar of the bench before letters, where a cloak leaves a draft, how to slip a bare foot toward the fire without waking a dozing ant, when to go limp so an elder can shift and make a space. The first arithmetic is warmth. How many bodies under how many hides equals one night of rest. And the first ethics are the same: stay when you would rather turn, cover when you would rather keep, lend your heat. There are hierarchies without malice, and they write themselves into muscle memory. A bride led to the household bench upon marriage knows she will share not only a man's cloak, but his rank, their place inching toward the hearth as their value grows, then slipping back when fortune dips. A new farmhand takes the draft as part of his wage. An honored foster son edges into firelight because the future rides on him. The bench tracks the household's tides like a tally carved in oak, no ink, no proclamation, only bodies moved a little nearer to what they need. And then, beyond the social bonds and the winter bargains, there is the simple animal fact: the breath of the sleepers rises together, makes a low cloud under the rafters, and the house sweats from its beams. Cold fingers slip under hides and find another wrist. A child, startled by a dream, is already in a nest of arms. Even the quarrelsome, even the aloof, are impossible to separate from the human weather of the place. Alone is a summer word here. In winter, the dictionary shrinks until only we remains. If you listen hard, you can hear the hall counting itself, not with numbers, but with sounds: the old man's shallow whistle, the girl's irregular flutter, the dog's sigh, the soft percussive clack of a servant's teeth when the draft finds bone. The house marks who is present by the music they make asleep. Absence, when it happens, is an audible hole, a missing instrument. In a longhouse, even grief is measured in warmth, the cold spot left behind. So tonight, as you lie on the edge of the fur and share its weight with 3 others, understand what truly keeps the chill out. It is not only timber, not only turf or imported hide, it is the quiet decision made 100 times an hour to hold together. The longhouse earns its name not by length alone, but by what it extends kinship, obligation, the long reach of one person's heat into another's dark. The walls bend inward, the people bend toward one another, and winter, for a few hours, yields. You stir in the smoky dark and feel a thicker warmth on the air, the kind that doesn't come from fire or wool. It breathes. At the far end of the hall, beyond a low fence of stakes and woven wattle, the cattle shift, the sheep murmur, a pig snorts into its bedding and settles again. To a modern nose, it is a wall of scent hay, hide, dung, the sharp sweetness of urine, but to a Viking household, this is the second hearth. Livestock are not visitors, they are residents, winter companions whose bodies lift the temperature a notch, and whose presence turns a cold shelter into something survivable. Archaeology sketches the floor plan in quiet lines, post holes tracing pens, shallow troughs cut into earth for fodder, packed layers that read like pages a straw, manure, straw again telling of seasons stacked one over another. In some halls, the animal end drops slightly, a byre floor sloped for drainage, so that melt and muck creep away from sleepers. Between animal and human sections stands a partition low enough to lean across, high enough to turn hooves and horns. You could step over it with the sleepy swing of the leg. And sometimes, if someone forgotten to latch a wattle gate, a goat would. The heat they give off is humble, steady, relentless. A cow at rest throws off more warmth than a small fire left to sulk, and several cows together become a woolly engine humming through the night. You feel it when the embers fade to a red snake under ash. The air does not collapse into frost. It hovers, held aloft by a dozen lungs and the slow furnaces of ruminant stomachs. No one in this house measures in units, but they know the arithmetic in their bones. One animal is comfort, a byre full is insurance. Of course, the warmth has a price. The animal end of the hall hums, with its own climate damp rising as the straw drinks and releases, a sweet rot that can cling to skin. Children raised here can tell new straw by its song underfoot, and old straw by the smell even in their sleep. The bedding goes down in autumn, a golden quilt for hooves, then is turned and layered through the dark months. The alchemy is practical dry on top, heat building below as old straw and dung begin to change. Whether anyone names compost, they know what it does. The floor itself grows warm. Sleep stitches itself around this arrangement. The family closest to the partition takes warmth and burden both. They wake when a calf noses the boards, when a cow coughs, when a ewe's restless bleat means lambing is near. Night tasks flow like tides, a boy up to check the water, a girl to throw another twist of hay, a man to push the embers together and then listen, head cocked, for the sound of hooves that should be still. The longhouse asks for attention without making speeches. If the animals live, the people live. It is a contract as old as the first fence. There are hazards. Sparks wander. A single ember, snapped from a log and carried by an unlucky draft, can find its way to dry bedding where hooves churn the surface to tinder. Scarred clay patches in floors, layers of charred straw in dig trenches, are what remain of those rude awakenings, midnight eruptions smothered with cloaks. Buckets passed, hand to hand, the wordless panic of a fire that cannot be allowed to take, and always the balance bank the hearth low against smoke and risk the chill. Let it flare and you feed heat to the wrong corner of the room. The animals bring security that has nothing to do with temperature. A dog sleeps by the door and hears what men miss. Horses, if the household is lucky enough to stall them inside, prick ears and snap awake at footfalls beyond the wall. Even the slow, suspicious lift of a cow's head carries farther than a whisper. In lands where wealth walks on hooves and raids can bite at dawn, the longhouse becomes a chest with living treasure. Wood bars the door, horn and instinct keep watch, hands find the spear before eyes are fully open. There are irritations you cannot romanticize away. Manure clings to boots. A goat, given the chance, will find the tastiest hem of a cloak and worry it to rags. Pigs, warm and clever, may decide midnight is a good hour to rearrange their bedding. Children learn a second alphabet in the byre, the rip of hay, the slick sound of water into a wooden trough, the unmistakable splat that means tomorrow's chore has already arrived. Yet in the same breath, they learn a second arithmetic. How many animals can a winter's hay feed? How many kids can be born and live? Heat is counted in futures as much as degrees. Sometimes the partition is a suggestion more than a wall. Festivals, storms, or sickness can shuffle the plan. A weakened cow is brought nearer the embers. A sow farrowing early is fenced off with a fresh hurdle within reach of human hands. A child with a fever is settled where animals breathe like bellows. The longhouse is a single organism with organs swapping places as need demands. You do not ask whether the kitchen belongs beside the bedroom. There's only the place where warmth and work and watchfulness make the most sense tonight. When weather softens, the arrangement loosens. Doors linger open longer. Muck is carried out in creaking barrows to the fields that will take it. The byre smells less of breath and more of sun. But at midwinter's stone-hard core, when the wind is iron and the fjord rings to a thrown pebble, the indoor herd is not a compromise, it is wisdom. Ask any old woman with a lifetime of Februaries behind her whether she would trade the smell for another degree of cold, and she will tell you to fetch more hay. Even belief sharpens in this half-stable, half-hall. A house spirit is said to favor tidy stalls. A careless boy who leaves a gate unlatched may feel more than his father's strap. A small offering, a splash of ale on the threshold at the animal end, a crust tucked into a post's crack feel sensible when so much of the family's fate stamps there in the dark. The prayer at night is not grand. Let the fire hold. Let the cow stand. Let the calf take the teat. Let no shadow lift the latch. Warmth and blessing are measured in the same breath. So you lie with your feet toward the partition and your face toward the embers, and you listen to the other half of your hearth. Steam feathers from backs when animals rise. Hooves clatter softly in a stop. The dog sighs, reassured by new arrangements of bodies. The house exhales and inhales by turns, human, animal, human, animal, until the difference blurs into one a slow rhythm that keeps the frost outside the turf. It is not a romance. It is a partnership, hands for hooves, milk for mouths, heat for sleep. In the reckoning of the North, that bargain is as old as the first winter and as sound as oak. The night in a longhouse does not behave like a wall from dusk to dawn. It moves like a tide. No one expects to sink for 8 smooth private hours. That is a modern luxury with clocks and sealed windows. Here, rest comes in pieces. Bodies drift down, rise again, then drift down once more because the fire asks for hands, the animals ask for ears, and the dark itself invites wakefulness. A man stirs, toes the bench for his boots, and shuffles to the hearth. A woman lifts, listening for a lamb's thin cry. The house breathes, then breathes again. Some call these intervals first and second sleep, though no one puts names to them in the moment. It is simply the way the night works. After the evening's last talk and a slow dimming of the coals, the hall settles. A few hours later, as embers fade to a smoldering spine, people rise in ones and twos. Someone scrapes ash aside to coax the red heart alive. Someone adjusts the roof board a finger's width. Someone slips out into the yard to answer a small need under a sky full of iron stars. You can almost feel that outdoor shock air that bites the teeth. A plank underfoot, hard with frost. The doorway behind you breathing heat. You look up and catch the aurora lifting its green veil across the north. A slow river over the ridgepole. Inside, it was smoke and sleep sounds. Outside, it is a sky that remembers your size. You hurry back through the door, press it shut, and the longhouse inhales you again, your cheeks stinging, breath a white ribbon in the gloom, hands already reaching for the coals. Those who wake do not always speak. Sometimes they sit at the edge of the bench, cloak around the shoulders, and simply watch the ember line brighten with a few careful tweaks. Sometimes there is murmured talk about weather that chewed the cattle's patience, about a neighbor's rumor, about the timing of the next crossing. Other nights, it is prayer under the breath. A few grateful words to the unseen keepers of the roof beam. In these interludes, the hall is half world, half chapel chores performed with the attention of rites. Children fold this rhythm into their bones without learning it. A drowsy boy's eyes open to see his mother's silhouette at the hearth, hair lit like smoke. A girl pads across the planks to the partition, checks for the steady hush of a calf nursing, and slides back into the nest between adults. There is comfort in waking to other wakings, a reassurance. That night is not an enemy, just a road with milestones of watchfulness. When elders tell the old tales, these hours are when the voices are softest and the listening deepest. What breaks the night is a necessity, not insomnia. Fire wants nursing, vents need a trimming, animals insist on their own clock. The longhouse expects a rotation rather than a roster. One night, the old man rises because his knees already ache. Another night, the son, because he heard the dog growl in his dream. Another night, the mother, because she keeps count of wood and knows which log will last to dawn. If someone fails, the room knows it at once. Smoke thickens, cold sifts along the floor. People cough and turn, and the negligent sleeper burns with shame by breakfast. There are people who like these hours, the quiet workers. A woman picks up a spindle and lets flax or wool twist through her fingers by lamp glow, winding piece into the thread. A man checks a broken strap he meant to mend in daylight and now can touch without demands on his ears. Even a guest may murmur a story in the middle stretch, when half the room is drowsing and half is awake, and the tale travels farther for the hush. In the sagas, nights rarely pass as blanks. They hold confessions, decisions, small agreements sealed over embers. Scholars far in the future will argue over how universal this segmented rhythm was. They will weigh songs and stories against ruins and remark that darkness shaped sleep as surely as cold. The people inside the hall would shrug at that. They do not name a theory. They manage a fire, yet the pattern leaves traces even in a speech, a word for pre-dawn gray that has the taste of expectation, a turn of phrase that assumes a person might be awake in the middle and unstartled by it. The house writes its customs into the tongue. Time here is not measured by candles with dripping pins or by bells pealed from a tower. It is counted in tasks when the first ember is banked, when the lamb's breathing evens, when the roof board is cracked open to release a throat-stinging billow, when the dog shakes off frost and curls again. Those intervals lodge in memory more firmly than ours. Ask someone when a thing happened and you'll hear, after the first sleep, or between the fire's two glowings, or simply in the dark before the rooster, and then, after that midpoint, the little island of wake sleep returns like a friendly tide. People lower themselves to the benches again. Cloaks are resettled. A hand slides across to find another hand. The second descent is often sweeter than the first, a body warmed by the errand, a mind quieted by small duty done. If dreams come, they arrive close to the coals' faces visited by their dead. Warnings dressed in antlers, bargains struck with weather. Whether those visions are smoke-borne or God-sent, no one can say. But in the early gray, they are conversation. The house seems larger in this rhythm, as if the night grants more room by unfolding in parts. The first stretch is for laughter and settling, the middle for tending and thinking, the latter for the soft sleep that makes morning less of a blow. You, lying there, learn your neighbor's patterns. The uncle, who always snores himself awake, then swears he meant to rise. The cousin who hears the animals before anyone. The grandmother who wakes exactly when frost begins to creep along the door beam. Even without a clock, the household owns a schedule, traced in breath and footfall. On the hardest nights when wind gnaws the turf and the smoke hole sulks, the segments multiply. People rise twice, 3 times. Wood must be spared, but not so fiercely that chilblains bloom on toes. Embers roll together, then apart, breathing like a sleeping animal. The dog patrols a half circle and thumps down again with a sigh that says, even watchmen grow weary. No one curses the interruptions allowed. The price of an unbroken night would be a frozen one. You learn to weigh rest against survival and discover that 2 smaller sleeps can feel, at dawn, like a single good one. When the ridge of the roof finally takes a pale edge, the house reaches its last brief doze. Those who were up in the dark are the first to rise in the gray. They own the ember and rouse the flame, check the stall's buckets, and crack the door for a peal of air that tastes of iron and morning. The second sleepers blink, stretch, and pretend they never woke. But all of them carry the same satisfaction another passage made. Night ferried in 2 careful crossings. Not luxury, enough. And in the north, enough is everything. The night deepens, and though bodies give themselves to the benches, ears refuse to sleep. A longhouse never falls truly silent. It settles into a layered murmur, a woven sound that belongs to winter as much as frost. You hear it before you understand it. Breath, timber, animal, ember, each noise stitching into the next until the room feels not quiet, but held. For a Viking, this was the music of rest, imperfect and necessary. Archaeology can lift hearthstones and read soot like a ledger, but it cannot excavate noise. For that, the clues are softer verses that remember a hall's hum, stories that begin after supper and end when heads lower. The observers who wrote of farmhouses where a snoring and goat talk shared a roof. Imagine the evening ebb, the last bowl scraped, the last horn passed. A verse spoken to polite laughter, and then, as lamps are pinched, the new orchestra begins. First, the fire asserts itself. Coals give their tiny detonations. Damp knots burst with whispering hiss. A half-burned log slumps and answers with a hollow thud. These are the metronomes of the place, counting out minutes no one measures. On cold nights, the hearth is talkative, throwing the sparks like bees, then quieting to a cat's purr under ash. Children learn the catalog of those sounds the way city children learn sirens. Then come the animals, old companions to human sleep. The cattle behind the partition are not shy about their commentary. A hoof slides, a hide creaks against wood, breath floods the dark with fog. Goats mutter in their thorny language. A sow turns a straw into rain with her rooting. Even a hen, feeling dawn while it is still deep night, lifts a throat and thinks better of it. Together, this pen-side music is proof of wealth and safety. What a stranger calls a stink and din, the household reads as inventory and insurance. Human sounds build over that base. A bench groans as a shoulder finds comfort. Someone coughs the longhouse cough, smoke rounded and thick, and someone else answers without waking. A baby beads one cry and is tucked back into heat with a palm and a whisper. A man half-dreaming mutters a name no one will ask about in the morning. And always, close as a winter neighbor, snoring. It comes in registers dignified rumble, reed pipe wheeze, heroic sawmill. Tales make a sport of it on feast nights. Before the first sleep breaks, there is still talk, thin and low, the kind that travels under rafters like smoke. Someone repeats a verse a skald once gave them, its syllables clipped and clever. Someone else, less gifted, offers a plain story of a plain day and receives the kindness due honest words. A mother hums a tune that never makes a parchment and will warm her grandchildren 2 winters from now. If a lyre lives here, it is plucked softly, strings doing work the fire cannot. The room's timber has a voice, too. Every gust outside asks a question, and the frame answers. Gables click, pegs gripe. The ridge makes a noise like an old back eased into a chair. Those tones teach the difference between weather and trouble. Tonight, the roof only complains. On worse nights, it warns, and men wake already pulling on boots. There is a keen absence. Modern ears struggle to imagine the lack of a mechanical hum. No clock, no road of tires, no distant engine. The quiet has its own presence, big, cool, almost physical, so the smallest thing enlarges to fill it. A coal settling becomes an event. A dog's single bark is a proclamation. That clarity makes stories large and fears sometimes larger. After the talk is banked like embers, the rest of the soundtrack is stubbornly bodily coughs and sighs and that democratic sawing of throats. The noise has a shape, cresting and falling with the fire's fortunes, spiking when a draft noses smoke down, quieting when the roof board gives mercy. Even pests have their faint chorus nails meeting itch, a cloak snapped and resettled. Sleep in such a place is social, not solitary. You rest inside a choir. The noises teach patience. If you can doze through a pig's dream and your uncle's nasal trumpet, and the wind nagging the turf, you can doze anywhere. People grown in halls like this carry a gift. They can hold thought through interruption, continue work inside chatter, stand watch with voices at their shoulder. Not every strength is forged at sea or on a battlefield. Some are made by sleeping amidst a farm's loud grammar. What does the night do to story? It fattens it. Half waking is a friendly host. When the mind is thick with a smoke and near dream, a sentence can steer the room. This is when a skald's line lands like a spark in tinder. You see shapes in the beams and call them gods. You hear the cow's heavy breath and call it a promise for a spring. Children take their first adventures not from voyages, but from these in-between hours, where a voice and a flame and a roof can build a world without moving. In some houses, there is song, not the feast's stamping chorus, but the private melody mothers fold around infants and elders use on themselves like a charm. The words are weather and work sleep now. The sea is quiet, sleep now. The sheep are in, sleep now. The axe is hung, sleep now. The night is ours only so long as the fire consents. A father might sing to a fretful goat and be teased for it at breakfast. He will not mind. If a guest is present, he pays for the bench with news. Even his snoring is forgiven if he has fresh names to lay on the table. Kinglings fought. Harvests failed. A ship that found a shore richer than the story allowed. His voice stretches maps beneath the roof so children can travel while their feet do not. By morning, someone will repeat those shapes while chewing bread and pretend they, too, have seen them. Toward dawn, there is a curious hush. Not silence, exactly, but the stage between movements when the conductor's hand is lifted and the next music has not begun. Animals dream quieter. The champion snorer flips and grants a brief mercy. The fire gives one last soft breath under ash. It is the most fragile 10 minutes of the night, and for that reason, the sweetest. This is the Longhouse's truth. Sleep is not escape from the world's voice. It is sleep inside it. The noises are not obstacles, but assurances. The fire's tick says heat remains. The cow's sigh says wealth sleeps nearby. The child's even breath says the future is in the bed. You are not granted quiet, you are granted company. And company, in the north, is warmer than silence. The hours creep forward, and you begin to notice the warmth that comes from nowhere you can see. It blooms under ribs and behind the sternum, a steady banked heat that belongs not to the fire, but to supper. In the Viking world, night was endured not only by timber and turf, not only by wool and fur, but by the furnace of the body stoked with barley, meat, and milk before the benches swallowed everyone whole. If the hearth guarded the hall, the belly guarded the sleeper. Think of what went into that furnace, the day's bread dark, dense, and the honest ground from barley and rye on the stone querns that left a fine grit in every bite, a small mineral signature the teeth remembered. Think of the thick pottages heavy with peas or broad beans, the stews that gathered lamb shanks and pork bones, onions and leeks, a handful of herbs from the doorway plot. Think of milk given new lives, curds salted and hung until they sharpened, soft fresh cheese folded into porridge, whey kept in cool tubs for drinking and for preserving, the skimming of cream saved for a feast. In the dark season, fat mattered. Marrow mattered most. A bone split along its shine, its center eaten with fingers still pink from the heat. It is easy to imagine this last task before sleep, a child working at the shining spoon of a tibia, then sliding into furs with a quiet, satisfied heat running the length of them. Archaeology speaks in fragments charred barley grains in hearth ash, carbonized rye seeds trapped in floor layers, fish bones piled like commas in rubbish pits, cattle metapodials broken just where the marrow gives, latrine heaps the bluntest historians return. Their verdict, bread and beans, were common company. Parasites and grit came with them. The picture is not glamorous, but it is generous in the right ways. These foods did what cold demanded, sat heavy, burned slow, turned into hours of inner fire. There was hierarchy at the table, even when hunger made everyone kin. A chieftain's board might esteem with joints of roasted mutton, ocean fish salted in lengths, butter set out in yellow blocks like small suns. A poorer farm pulled more from grain bins and dried cupboards, hard crusts softened in broth, a few scraps of pork or goat fat to season the pot, a pan of barley gruel sweetened with a last scrape of honey. Both households ate to live. One slept replete, the other merely fed. You can feel the difference lying here. The draft that sneaks under your cloak argues louder if supper was thin. Preservation made winter possible and marked the night's warmth long before it was tasted. In late autumn, the smokehouses wrote their quiet script across strips of a fish and meat, and wind-drying racks wrung water from a cod and haddock until they stiffened like boards. Cabbage and leeks braided into bunches to hang near the door. Turnips and roots went to pits under packed straw. The ground itself turned cupboard. In the dairy corner, milk became something more obedient to time curds salted, whey soured, hard cheeses nursed into their own winter. Berries, bilberry, lingon, cloudberry found their way into jars or into honey. On good nights, a spoonful felt like a rumor of the sun. The evening meal settled the body into its night work. A bowl of barley pottage, stirred until it shone, went into everyone, young to old. Mountain people swear that porridge is a blanket. Northern farmers knew the same truth without poetry. After meat stews, the hall's tone changed. Shoulders sank. The loud men softened. Even the goats grew less argumentative. Warmth climbed from a stomach to sternum, then outward into fingers and toes, where it could argue with drafts and narrow gaps in joinery. Stories insist on appetite. Sagas love a man who can lift a bull or clear a table, and the boasting has the gleam of theater. Yet beneath the exaggeration sits a practical admiration in a climate that bites. Caloric capacity is not vulgarity, but vigor. A hero who eats whole sides of meat reads like a caricature now. Then he read as a good stove with legs. To mothers and elders measuring out stores, the mathematics were blunt enough tonight, enough next week, and is still enough for the hungry spring when snow lingers and bins speak in echoes. Some nourishment ran in liquid form, calmer than ale and steadier than water. Milk, warm from the animal, could tilt an evening toward ease. Sour whey quenched and cut through smoky tongues. Broths made from bones cooked long until they clouded. Limned with fat left a veil of warmth that even the worst drafts could not entirely argue with. The horn passed around with ale or small beer, did its own work. Drink makes the face glow and the ear forgive. And the first minutes of heat feel honest as a blessing, but the body knows the difference between a rush and a banked coal. The stew remains when the horn's cheer leaks away. Listen, and the meal continues after the bowls are stacked. Someone cracks a bone for marrow, Someone scrapes the pot with a crust and eats the scrap like a prize. Someone pours a last ladle of broth into a child's cup and calls it courage. A baby burps, a small triumph. A grandmother by the hearth crumbles a pinch of salt on her tongue and sighs. The glow in the room is not only from embers, it is from bodies quietly burning what the day gave them. Not every belly met the night the same way. In bad years, fish runs late or thin, a blight in the beans. An animal lost the longhouse learned another sound, the smaller voice people make when they pretend to be full. Hunger is not an absence of food alone, it is an absence of heat. Hours later, when the fire has slumped and the draft is sharp and the blanket feels thin as excuse, then the night lengthens. Then people turn more often and more bodies seek one another like magnets. Architecture and family do what the pot could not. Still, even in hard seasons, craft and habit pulled warmth from narrow margins. A smear of rendered fat under the crust of bread, a coil of sausage broiled at the hearth's edge, the chewed shine of a roasted rind. These are small technologies of heat. A pinch of dried angelica leaf in the pot, a rind of cheese dissolved into a soup, a spoon of honey for a feverish child, all are gestures of rescue. Practical people sometimes carry poetry under their fingernails. The moral life of food lives here as well. Hospitality was tested at the bowl as much as at the door. A guest given stew before questions added his warmth to the hall that night and to the hall's reputation for years. Stinginess had a long afterlife, so did generosity. You can feel that ethic in your own ribs as you lie down. The horn was not withheld, the ladle was not mean, and the sleep will be easier for everyone because someone chose open-handedness when storerooms muttered caution. Scholars argue politely in far-off rooms about which mattered most against the cold calories. Cloth or craft, they are right to debate. A bad diet under the best cloak is still a bad night. The soundest house cannot heat an empty stomach, but wool remembers heat, timber refuses wind, and a stew and bread turn into the sort of warmth that climbs out beyond the cloak's edge and says, I will last you till midnight. Stoke me again before dawn. The answer is not a champion. It is a braid. Now, imagine lying back after such a meal. The straw is still scratched. The smoke still a thin knife in the nose. The neighbor still a chorus of snores, but a different patience holds you. From the center of you, a steady warmth moves like a tide. It will not make the hall summer, it will make the difference. You pull the cloak higher, press a child closer, and feel the fire in your belly and the fire on the floor take turns at their duties. Between them, the night becomes passable. Between them, morning is possible. The horn comes round after supper, and the hall loosens, faces pinken, shoulders drop, and voices rise into that easy neighborhood of song and laughter that feeds on darkness as surely as it feeds on drink. You tip the rim and feel the first slip of warmth that is not stew and not fire, an interior blush that spreads from throat to cheek, like a hand pressed there. In a Viking night, this too was a tool. Ale and mead were not only celebration, they were part of the long negotiation with cold. What fills the horn began its life earlier in the year, grain cut and shocked, threshed and winnowed, then coaxed into sweetness by a slow dance of soaking and drying, malted barley, and where barley was stubborn. Oats or rye joined the task, met hot water in wooden tubs. The mash steam smelled like a field after rain. Herbs went in, not hops yet, but the bitter, fragrant company of bog myrtle, yarrow, heather, sweet gale groot to keep rot at arm's length and to turn sweetness into something with backbone. The wort ran off into tubs and waited for a miracle that wasn't a miracle at all, the house's own invisible workforce. Yeasts lived in staves and rafters, in stirring poles and woolen sleeves. They fell to their work while the brewer listened for the first domestic music of fermentation, a whisper and a pop, a small inland sea beginning to breathe. By custom and practice, brewing belonged largely to women, the same hands that turned milk into cheese and raw fleece into cloth. They knew the look of a healthy froth, the smell of a batch turning wrong, the measure of herbs that soothed, and the measure that made men sing too loudly. They kept a household's calendar, big brews for feasts, weddings, harvest thanks, and the winter rites, small byre for the work of days weak and safe, a drink for children and laborers that carried a small warmth without the stumble. A farm that brewed well was as well regarded as a farm that plowed straight. A hall that poured generously gathered friends the way a flame gathers moths. Mead sat on a higher shelf, honey translated into light, slow to make, quick to vanish. It tasted of summer held hostage in winter, of flowers that would not be seen again for months. A horn of mead could turn a night ceremonial. Oaths leaned on it, alliances were sweetened by it, songs remembered it. Where grain was thin on Iceland's young lava and in Greenland's hard corners, honey was rarer still, and mead became a visitor rather than a resident. There, ale bent toward what a place could give way, and buttermilk drunk sour and strong, a broth that warmed from the inside, or an ale made thinner, stretched to meet necessity. Warmth takes the shape of the land that offers it. It is easy, lying here, to believe that drink makes the hall warmer, and it does. In a way, alcohol opens the skin to its own blood, erases the first edge of chill, makes neighbors kinder and stories longer. The horn moves, and the benches become a raft of laughter. The wind loses its teeth outside, yet there is a double edge in the cup. The body that feels flushed is a body shedding heat it cannot spare. Faces glow while the core slips colder. A man who drinks too deeply in a long winter night may wake shivering harder than before, or not wake promptly when embers need coaxing and the ash blanket must be folded back. Comfort, like fire, is beautiful and dangerous at once. Listen to the hall's changed music when the ale is flowing. Boasts grow antlers. Old tales put on new muscles. A singer turns an ordinary afternoon of fishing into a net straining with whales. A grandmother laughs until she has to sit, then remembers, through tears and giggles, a winter so cold the doors froze inward and oxen slept, with their noses tucked under their bellies. The horn is a conductor's baton, pointing to one voice and then the next, teasing harmony from the crowd. Even the goats quiet for a time, perhaps disarmed by the steadier rhythm of people and the hearth's satisfied breathing. The craft of drinking has its own tools and manners. Horns, yes, polished bright, sometimes banded with metal, treacherous to set down before empty, and wooden cups as stout as barrels in miniature. A guest receives the rim, and a look with it welcome, and also witness. A host who pours tight is judged tight. One who pours deep is remembered deep into the year. To drink is to say, briefly, that there is more than fear and weather. To pass the horn is to say, no one is alone here, not tonight. But the hall keeps its ledger. The same drink that makes sleep arrive smiling can make sleep reckless. Everyone knows a story told with affectionate scorn of an uncle who sprawled too close to the hearth with his cloak smoking, of a cousin who rolled from the bench in search of the door and found the goat pen instead, of a guest who mistook a neighbor's cloak for his own and started a quarrel with a snore still in his throat. There are quieter costs, too: a man who oversleeps his watch on the embers, a woman who forgets to crack the roof board when the smoke thickens, a child who wakes thirsty in the night and finds only ale within reach. The Longhouse forgives much. Winter forgives nothing. So households learn a choreography: pour, share, laugh, and then appoint someone to mind the fire, steady a soul with a light hand and a clear head. Warmth is a communal craft. The cup must be braided to the chore. There are drinks meant purely for warmth without untying the tongue. Hot broths, milk heated to a sigh, a posset of whey and herbs for a cough, a spoon of honey folded into warm water for a child's sore throat. These lack glamour and have the stubborn virtue of being exactly enough. You can feel the difference as you lie down. Ale's warmth is a lamp in the face. Broth's warmth is a coal laid behind the heart. Even without books and thermometers, people noticed patterns. A man who drank hard and slept at the edge grew cold faster. A woman who warmed milk and put children in the middle of the family heap woke with fewer small blue fingers to rub. A house with a brewing day that ended early found fewer burns and more embers left alive at dawn. Wisdom accumulates like soot under rafters gritty, unsentimental, useful. There is religion in the rim, too. A first pour to the floor for the house's unseen keepers. A wetted finger touched to a child's brow. A quiet word into the fire before the horn goes round the first time. The line between thanks and habit is thin and unimportant. Both hold the night together. On great nights, harvest's end, a wedding, the turning of the year libations run ahead of words, and the hall shines with a mood that feels larger than meat and drink. A person could believe, for a few hours, that winter will be gentle. The morning will answer with its numbers, but the night has its rights. Lay back now and measure the truth of the cup in your own bones. The horn put a glow in your face. The stew set a coal behind your ribs. Your cloak remembers the day's fires, and your neighbor's shoulder is unashamedly near. The draft still gropes along the floor. The smoke still stinks. The straw still scratches. Yet the balance has shifted a finger's width toward mercy. You will sleep. Some drink deeper, some stop early. A few drink not at all and practice the quiet pride of clear nights and clear mornings. The hall accommodates all this, as it accommodates goats and gossip, sorrow and snoring. It is not a place of perfection. It is a place of sufficiency, and the cup is part of that, a small, bright tool in a dark season. Like every tool here, it works best in a hand that remembers the cost of wood, the price of grain, the frailty of embers, and the bluntness of dawn. By the time the horn has gone its last circle, the watch is set. The ash is drawn over the coals, and the lamplight, where there is oil to spare, has been pinched to a thread. Your cheeks cool, the belly's warmth remains. You pull the cloak higher, listen to the hall turn itself toward sleep, and let that slight interior fire do its share of the night's work. Neither master nor servant but partner to wool, timber, and kin. Between them, the winter loosens just enough to let dreams through. Winter does not fall the same way everywhere, nor do halls breathe the same air from coast to coast. What you have felt inside this smoky ship of timber and turf is true, and it is also many truths braided together by season and place. The north is a patchwork islands lashed by salt wind, fjords with forests clinging to their ribs, wide inland valleys where the snow lies like a held breath, young volcanic plains where trees are a rumor and the stone is the only certainty. Each landscape knits its own version of a night. Along Norway's wooded shoulders, trunks were there to be felled, and walls grew out of oak and pine, chinked with clay and moss. Fires ate split logs, and the smell in the rafters was resin and sap, a sweetness that stung the eyes and stuck to cloaks. In Denmark's flatter fields, where the wind has few obstacles and the soil remembers old wetlands, turf rose higher on the walls and thatch lay thick, stitched to the roof with patient hands. Sweden's long spine, with its hunting forests and lakes, sent in more hides, more smoked fish hung over embers meals that perfumed the night as surely as the logs that cooked them. Cross water and time to the new farms thrown like anchors onto Iceland's lava and Greenland's harsher edge, and the picture shifts again. There, trees were scant or absent, roofs learned to be made of earth itself, and the bones of whales when they could be had, or driftwood rescued from a sea that had gnawed it half to sculpture. Peat and dried dung fed the fire as much as wood ever did. Lamps fattened on fish oil through a thin, blue-edged light. The smoke in those halls tasted of bog and shore, and would have told you, even with your eyes closed, where you were. If your cloak smelled of tar and salt, if your boots crackled with frost and sea spray, then your night was an island night, your embers hard-won and guarded like a debt. Season writes an even bolder hand across sleep. In deep winter, the day is a blade so short it cannot cut the chores into neat pieces. Night is a sail that will not be furled. The hall becomes a full-time country. Work, meals, mending, stories, brewing all gravitate to the hearth. Bodies settle onto benches earlier, rise in the dark, doze again. The old dance of first sleep and second sleep moving to winter's slow drum. Children are pulled into the middle without argument. Cloaks never fully dry. They only change their mind about dampness. The ash blanket on the fire is tended like a child itself, its tiny glow more precious than a silver. But turn the hinge of the year, let the sun wake for longer, and the hall loosens. In spring, doors yawn open, smoke learns new paths, straw is shaken out with less muttering and replaced with the first sweet-smelling bundles from last year's stubble. Chores leak outward, spinning walks to the threshold, then to the yard. Looms creak with the optimism of longer afternoons. Nights grow thinner, less freighted, less crowded with breath. Someone may even choose the floor, or an outbuilding where the air is cleaner, preferring a chill on the face to the cough that winter taught. The benches still hold the family, but the grip is looser, fingers resting rather than clenching. Summer where it is truly summer changes sleep itself. The sky will not shut its eye in the far north, and the hall becomes a place to nap in rather than surrender to. Fields drag bodies into their green gravity. Nets and oars draft others down to the strand. At distant fishing stations, men coil under awnings of sailcloth, stretched from oars, ship tents, that turn a keel into a short house. The bedding there is whatever can be spared: a cloak folded double, a seal hide if luck has been kind, heather pulled and piled in haste. The sea throws its night music against that canvas slap of wave, groan of rope, the gulls' thin knives of sound. Sleep in summer is shorter, saltier, practical. It is a measure that fits between tasks rather than a deep basin you fall into. Autumn pulls everything home again, tighter than before. The hall fattens with sacks of grain, bundles of herbs, barrels sticky at their staves, with wool washed and combed, with hides being turned by patient hands. Bedding is inventoried like treasure. What a straw remains sound, which furs kept out damp and which invited. Cloaks are brushed free of a year's burrs and cobwebs and laid near the hearth, so their oils will loosen and their fibers remember how to be warm. Children are sized against the benches, measured not with a string, but with a mother's practical eye who still fits where, who must be moved closer to heat. By first frost, most halls have rehearsed the winter's arrangement twice over in their heads. Even within a single valley, night can shift with a status and craft. A chieftain's fire eats higher heaps of wood. His benches sag under thicker furs and foreign pelts that feel like a whisper against a cheek used to local wool. Lamps may glow longer. A brazier might sit by the high seat, an island of glow within the wider light. Down the lane, the smallholder's hall is narrower, its smoke less forgiving, its lamps rationed to the time it takes to finish a seam or stir a pot. But when the wind claws, both halls listen for the same groan in their beams. Both lay ash over their embers with the same careful hand, and both put children in the middle, as if the law were written in the wood itself. Fuel changes the night's temper, and place chooses fuel. Where forests stand, the crack and pop of split logs marks the hours. Where peat is king, the fire smolders lower, steadier, throwing a stubborn heat and a ghostlier haze. Dry dung, be it of cow or horse, burns with a soft insistence, less a flame than a breathing. A lamp of fish oil draws a line of light across a face and makes eyes shine as if tears stood there. All of these fires teach their own habits. A log fire needs turning and minding. Peat needs patience and air. Oil needs a cautious hand and a steady place, far from straw. The nightly choreography shifts with these demands. Who tends? How often? Where do sleepers lie in relation to danger and heat? The map is redrawn by what burns. The animal's warmth is also a local script. In milder coastal folds, cattle might winter in byres nearby, their heat a neighbor rather than a roommate. Inland, where a stormed sit and brood, and the cold is an architect. The partition between beast and bench is a low argument with necessity, and you smell their breath with every turn. In the islands, where fish are wealth, goats and sheep may hold the household's heart. Their pen is the hot end of the hall, and their bodies write a different weather on the people's backs. You may curse the goat that nibbles your fringe and bless it in the next breath for how your toes feel. Some differences are times doing as much as places. Early halls learn smoke the hard way. Their ridge vents boards that must be levered aside with a pole. Their blackened rafters still shiny with the latest layer of soot. Later halls grow craft better roof angles, more deliberate gaps under eaves, a sense for how wind sucks a room clean if you let it, how it steals heat if you misjudge. Skill accretes, and so does debate. One valley swears by a tight roof and a high hole, the next points to their own lungs and shakes their heads. Both make it through winter and believe themselves proven right. Travel stitches these worlds together. A woman from a wooded fjord marries into an Icelandic farm and measures the smell of peat against the memory of pine resin. A trader from the islands spends a winter inland and learns how logs sound when they split in true frost. They carry techniques the way they carry gossip lamp tricks, straw remedies, the herb that makes a bed less welcoming to fleas, the way to bank embers so that even a careless cousin cannot kill them by morning. Place teaches, people carry, place absorbs. The hall you lie in is both deeply local and quietly cosmopolitan. Its nights shaped by the land under it and by tales brought home in the hems of cloaks and the seams of boats. Season also rules the heart. In winter, hospitality swells because refusing a traveler is a kind of death sentence. In summer, with paths open and bodies strong, hospitality is more choosy, bound up with labor and time. Feast nights cluster where the dark is thickest, not because people forget hunger then, but because that is exactly when bodies need food, heat, and each other the most. Laws grow out of this rhythm, customs that look like kindness, but are really the muscle memory of a survival. To share a bench in January is culture. To find your own patch of straw in July is freedom. So when you think of a Viking night, do not think of a single room that repeats itself like a stamp across the map. Think of a family of rooms speaking dialects, the island hall that smells of fish and peat, the forest hall that smokes of resin, the valley hall tight with cattle heat, the windswept hall that listens all night to roof boards flex. Think of a year that opens and closes the hall like a hand, palming people together, spreading them apart, teaching one kind of sleep and then another. Think of 1,000 small adjustments roof board, ash, where the baby sleeps, which cloak lies outermost made new by every place and every month. The marvel is not that there were differences. The marvel is that all these differences still rhymed with one another, turning cold into something that could be outlasted with timber, wool, breath, and patience. Dawn is not yet a color, only a thinning of the dark. The hall you've learned by sound its breaths, creaks, mutters lies around you like a great animal that has finally quieted. And in that hush, the whole picture settles. Sleeping here was never simply closing your eyes. It was a compact with timber and turf, with fire and ash, with kin and cattle, with gods and ghosts, with the seasons themselves. Night after night, the contract was renewed. If the ember held, if bodies shared heat, if the roof kept its patience and the wind kept to its side of the wall, morning would return. It usually did. All the fragments you've walked through belong together. A cloak is not just clothing, it becomes a blanket, then an heirloom, then grave goods. A bench is not just a plank, it is a status by firelight, a boundary, a mattress, a small stage for whispered tenderness or midnight worry. Straw is not just litter, it is a repeating harvest turned into rest, shaken and renewed in a rhythm as ordinary as breathing. The hearth is not just heat, it is a center practical, social, sacred around which words are braided and children measure the world by warmth and shadow. Even the pests and the smoke have their place in the ledger of survival, irritants, and hazards. Yes, but also accidental preservatives, reluctant guardians against rot and insects worse than themselves. What we moderns call comfort is a scale the Vikings never owned. They traded in a different currency enough dry fiber to hold the body off the earth, enough wool to keep the damp from taking the bones, enough fur to quiet the shivers, enough lamp flame to make one more stitch, tell one more tale, find one more dropped toy in the straw, enough closeness that a child's breath stayed warm through the long watches. The miracle here is not luxury, but calibration, the continual, unglamorous tuning of a space so that life could pass through the dark intact. You can see now how the Longhouse was more than shelter. It was an instruction. Its sloping ribs taught people to lean together. Its smoke taught patience and remedies. Its benches taught pecking order and compromise. Its door taught caution and welcome in the same breath. Its ember taught custody, how to hand a small living thing from hour to hour without letting it die. Even the way the hall borrowed techniques from ships' overlapping layers, tight seams, vents like hatches, quietly told everyone inside, we cross something vast every night. Keep your crew close, mind your hull. We do not bank our fires with ash now. We set thermostats and forget them. We do not listen for cows breathing behind a timber rail. We listen for the hum of a compressor kicking on. We do not lie awake because smoke has made a ghost in the rafters. We lie awake because light leaks from another room, from a pocket, from a world that refuses to dim. And yet the old measures still fit. Families still draw the smallest into the middle. Partners still share a blanket against drafts of fear no wall can stop. We still keep a vigil of sorts, checking the child's forehead, the lock, the silent app that says everyone is home. The ember just changed shape. If there is a lesson to carry from this longhouse into your quiet room, it is not nostalgia. It is literacy. Learn again how to read the night. Notice what your shelter asks of you and what it gives. Where does your warmth come from? What do you do, by habit or by love, to keep it alive? Which people are the heat sources in your life? Which rituals are the ash blankets you lay over embers so they are waiting for you at dawn? The Vikings did not mistake discomfort for failure. They understood that comfort is a moving edge you steer by, not a dock you reach once and for all. That understanding will serve anyone in any century. Step back once more and look at the evidence that carried us here. Ruined halls blackened by centuries of smoke, turf walls that kept the story of dampness pressed into their own fibers, hearth troughs that run like scars down the center of rooms, post holes aligned like ghost ribs where benches once held a sleeping weight, bones that speak of cough and the strain and hard meals digested in laughter, poems that insist the fire was friend and judge, folk tales that remember children crosswise and guests sprawled where they fell after a feast. None of these pieces alone tell a full truth. Together they form a night with edges, weight, and breath. We have walked that night like guests. We have listened for the scrape of a poker through ash. We have smelled fish oil and peat and the sharp sweetness of resin. We have felt a straw scratch and then shift under a turning shoulder. We have heard a goat's soft complaint and a child's once clear cry that no parent ever sleeps entirely through. We have watched a hand, almost certainly a mother's, pull a cloak higher over both herself and someone smaller, while the fire makes a slow red river along its channel. We have understood the unshowy heroism of the person who gets up every time to tend the embers and never calls it bravery. And now the roof over us thins from black to something like slate. The ridge vent has become a seam of dull silver. Someone further down the bench coughs once and does not wake. Someone near the door lifts a knee and groans and becomes a person again. A dog shakes. A cow stamps. The ember agrees to become a flame. A pot will be set near it soon. A day will be ladled out of it. Children will be blinked into. Tasks will be named aloud as if naming were half the work. The long crossing is ending. Another will begin tonight, and the night after, and for as many winters as the beams can hold. If you wish, take one last inventory before you go. Raised platforms, a hand's width of warmth stolen back from the earth, straw, shaken into sweetness, then replaced when it turns to itch and shadow, wool, the stubborn miracle that forgives dampness and keeps holding heat anyway, furs, some local, some traveled farther than their owners ever did, lamps lit with fish and fat, drawing small futures on children's eyes before they close, the partition for animals, low and honest, the door bar, heavier than it looks, the listening that never really stops. These are the tools of a people who did not confuse being alive with being comfortable, and who understood that being alive together is warmer than being comfortable alone. And for you, now, a closing that fits the old cadence. Set your room in order, such as it is. Reduce the glare to ember. Lay your own ash blanket, call it a timer, a routine, a promise to yourself, and let it keep what matters alight until morning. Place your small and vulnerable things nearer the center. Pull a cover not for show, but for service, over the parts of you that tire first. Let the door be shut enough that you feel held, open enough that you can breathe. Somewhere, someone is stirring a fire for you even now, last night's self, tomorrow's courage, a friend's remembered voice. Accept their work. Accept that sleep is a passage, not a possession. The longhouse can fade. The smoke can climb back into its beam and vanish. The animals can turn their faces toward their own narrow mornings. The benches can resume being wood instead of maps. What you carry out is not soot, not itch, not the heaviness of hides. You carry a way of measuring the night that does not demand perfection before it grants you rest. You carry a scale that says, enough is enough, and means it with a kindness that is also a steel. You carry, perhaps, a little ember of your own small, stubborn, undeserving of poetry, and yet the very thing poetry exists to notice. Hello again, then, to your present room. It is quieter than any earth-roofed hall ever was. It is warmer by easier means, but your heart is the same kind of heart that lay under those rafters. Let it find the same kind of peace. Lower the volume. Let your eyes soften. Count not sheep, but the ordinary mercies within reach, and sleep. Traveler, as people have always slept when they could, held by whatever holds, wrapped in what warmth is at hand, assisted by the practices that make dawn possible. The night carries you. The ember waits under its ash. Morning is already on its way